Story number 1, Creature in the Woods. I was walking home from my friend's house one evening. The path took me downhill through a forest. It was quite late, so it was really dark, but there was just enough moonlight shining through the trees that it was possible to walk on the path without a flashlight. Just as I was in about the middle of my path, I started hearing twigs snapping and dried leaves crackling under footstep on my immediate right. I froze and looked to see if anyone was there. Nobody was. Then the grumbling noise became audible, like a big creature grumbling just to my right. It was loud and very close. I said in a small, frightened voice, "Hello?" But the grumbling, cracking, and snapping sounds continued. I was terrified. I'd never heard anything like that before. And to make things worse, I knew of the warnings of brown bears in nearby woods. I was trembling. I somehow pulled my phone out, turned on my flashlight, and shined it out in front of me. What I saw was nothing. But the grumbling continued. I strained my ears to listen where the sound was coming from. I shone the flashlight down, and that's when I saw it. A goddamn hedgehog? He was about a meter from me, burrowing for worms or God knows what, but the sound it was making, it made noise like a creature 100 times bigger. I wanted to punt that little fucker down into the valley. So, yeah, that's the one time I almost pooped my pants due to unbridled fear in the forest because of a hedgehog. Happy April Fool's Day, Rosebuds, and welcome back! Did I get you with that story? Today's volume is a special April Fool's collection. We're shaking it up and doing something a little different. If you're new here, we usually tell a group of stories that are all true and one that is fictional, and you get to guess which is the imposter. Then we do a reveal at the end of the episode. Today we're doing all true stories, with sort of a practical joke feel. All of these encounters have a sort of joke's on you kind of experience where the OP has horrific terror mounting, only to sheepishly realize there's a perfectly rational explanation for their fear. I hope you don't mind this more lighthearted breakaway from our normal spooky and paranormal content. With that, sit back, turn up the lights, and settle in for some fun stories that are not quite so paranormal tales to tell in the light. Story number 2, Stone Cold. My brother and I were home alone watching TV. He had an inflatable, life-size Stone Cold wrestler in the basement. When you punched it, it would pop back up and say things like, "'Cause Stone Cold says so." Not unlike those inflatable Bobo clown dolls that were popular in the 70s. So we're watching TV, and we know it's just us at home when suddenly we hear, "'Cause Stone Cold says so," coming from the basement. Very creepy, since the thing couldn't talk on its own. Something had to have moved it, and we were home alone. We both just looked at each other and ran down the stairs to see what was happening, bracing ourselves to see a monster, a ghost, hopefully not an intruder. Nope, none of these. Our dog had Stone Cold horizontal by the waist, and poor Stone Cold was rapidly deflating, water from the bottom weight dripping into the carpet like clear white blood. My dog's eyes were glazed over from the glory of the kill, and he'd periodically give Stone Cold another shake for good measure. You see, my brother had been chasing my dog with Stone Cold for about 2 weeks, and my dog was very afraid of this inflatable man. I only wish I could have seen him working up the nerve to approach and kill him. Rest in peace, inflatable Stone Cold. Story number 3, Not a Bird. A few years ago, I was out in my workshop and came into the house around midnight. I heard a weird screaming sound as I walked towards the house. I thought perhaps it was a bird. We have some strange birds here in western Pennsylvania, including screech owls. They're only like 8 inches tall, but they make a loud scream, like someone's being murdered. I go in the house and my wife asks, "Did you hear that noise?" Sure did. So I get the flashlight and walk down the hill from the house, following this sound. It's getting more ragged and scary. It's pitch black other than the feeble beam from my flashlight. The further I trek down the hill, it's getting louder. I get through the trees into the clearing that connects our fields, and the noise is coming out of the ground. I was super uneasy because I had no idea what could be making this god-awful noise, and wouldn't you know it, my flashlight is starting to flicker and die. I shine it down towards the ground where the sound is emanating from. I see there's a sinkhole next to our disconnected septic tank where storm runoff has eroded the soil. The hole is about 4 feet deep. I couldn't believe what I saw. The tiniest, newborn, white-tailed fawn I'd ever seen. She couldn't have been more than a few hours old because she was only half the size of a beagle. She was covered in mud and bleeding her little head off. I reached in and scooped her out with one hand. Her eyes were packed with mud, and she struggled weakly to get away from me, then resigned. I carried her back to the house and carefully washed the mud off, gently rinsing her face until she could see again. I wrapped her in a towel and put her in a box on the porch so she could fully dry off and get warm. Around 4 a.m., I carried the box back down to the hole, sat it down, then put a huge rock over the hole. At 7 a.m., I went back down to check on her, but she was gone. Later that evening, I was mowing the grass. Then way down at the bottom of the field, a big doe emerged from the brush, followed by the tiny fawn. Mom had come back for her. I saw them on occasion all during that summer. We have a lot of deer, so it's possible she's one of the adults now. I'm glad we didn't think it was just a bird. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have gone to investigate, and poor little thing would have probably died. Story number 4, Cookie. So a long time ago, I was at a friend's ranch-style house on a bit of land, and it was time for me to head home. Walked outside, and it's close to midnight, but the moon is almost full, so it's really bright. I'm parked back in the sticks a little bit, so it took me a second to get there. As I near my truck, I hear like a low growl/snort, and then suddenly the beating of feet against the ground. Super loud, but not as loud as a horse, nor was the pace as steady. It just kept getting louder and louder. I get a little freaked out, so I run to my truck and fumble my keys, getting them out of my pocket. They fall to the ground, just like some sort of scene from a horror movie. I bend over to grab them, and that's when I see something about as tall as my waist round the end of my pickup bed. I immediately knew it was a freaking werewolf, and that was it for me. I was going to die. This beast slams into me, knocks me to the ground, and jacks up my elbow. And that's how I met Cookie, the Great Dane. Apparently, she belonged to an elderly couple about 40 acres over. She gets bored and gets out of the fence. I had to go back and tell my friends what happened. We played with her another hour before I finally headed home. Cookie became a staple around the ranch house, and she always would wait for us when we pulled up. Side note, is it weird, or has anyone else had interactions with unknown creatures and just thought, damn, that's a monster. I'm totally effed for just like a split second? Seems like I have a bunch of those experiences. Lol. Story number 5, The Nightly Visitor. I used to watch X-Files a lot as a kid. Super big into aliens and the mysterious and all that. I was probably around 9 or 10 when this occurred. I used to sleep with my door open so my dog could come in and out at night. One night, I woke up because I had to use the restroom, and my dog, sleeping at the foot of my bed, started to growl towards the door. I've always been good about being able to walk around in my house without turning lights on and keeping my eyes relatively closed so I could get right back to sleep. At this point, I'm trying to rub the sleep out of my eyes to see what's in the hallway, and that's when I see it. A 3-foot-tall gray staring at me through my doorway. I froze, didn't dare move or avert my gaze for fear of it moving elsewhere and losing sight of it. I just stood there unblinking. It felt like hours passed, but it was probably 10 minutes. Now, my dad's work schedule had him getting up at 3 a.m. most mornings, and I had heard his alarm go off. His shower starts and stops, and finally the rustling of his keys going into his pocket. His door opens across the hall, illuminating the gray, but lo and behold, my gray hooded sweatshirt was draped over the vacuum cleaner just so. Story number 6. Slenderman. My parents' house is landlocked, which means it does not have direct access to the road. You have to go through someone else's property to access theirs. Currently, this is a parking lot that belongs to a park. I guess you could say my parents have kept their property natural. In other words, they despise yard work, so they basically have a house in the middle of the woods next to a park. I was coming home one night a few years ago. It was dark, between 11 and 12 p.m. I come around the corner. I'm headed up the driveway and immediately slam on the brakes. There was this tall thing coming out of the darkness right next to the driveway, and it was moving. It was taller than my car and super skinny. I freaking thought Slenderman was coming for me. As I sat there in shock, my eyes adjusted. It was a blue heron, a big, giant bird, and it had come up from the creek at the park, looking for food, I guess. Scared the hell out of me. Story number 7. Lights on the hill. Driving down a bumfuck nowhere hill road, commonly called the shortcut to the locals. We called it that because it went straight up a massive set of hills and straight down. It was carved and made by local people to avoid having to go all the way around, which was an extra 30 minutes depending on construction, logging, the local gravel/soil company, etc. The shortcut route is about 10 minutes long if you're going 50 miles per hour, and that was the average people usually went. I felt off about the road that night. It was nearly 1 a.m. I was heading home from a long trip that I had spent with some friends, and I was alone. I hadn't taken that route much, but I was tired and didn't want to waste time getting home. So I'm driving down the road at about 30 miles per hour, and I notice a slight orange-bronze haze coming in just above the nearby trees on my left. I figured it was a car, but the road curved to the right at that place and went straight from there, so there couldn't be any headlights coming from that direction. I slowed down, thinking maybe someone had gone off-road, but I couldn't see the origin of the lights if that was the case. Deciding it best not to be the curious, stupid person, like a low-budget horror movie who checks something out alone, I just pulled my handgun from my holster and set it on the center console, just in case, but kept going. I slowed the car as I came up to the curve so I wouldn't move away from the lights. That's when I saw it clearly. The lights were moving, ever so slightly at first, then gaining speed, kind of diagonally towards me, but would have passed me, and that's when I saw it peek through the trees. It's hard to describe. It was like a miniature electrical sun. The best representation I've seen is the electrical anomaly in Metro 2033. Imagine that, but orange and more fiery, plasma-like than electrical. It moved through the trees quickly. Then it struck some dead birch trees, and oh boy did those light up quick. This seemed to give it more energy, and it sped up and avoided a couple more trees before smacking straight into a big great oak. It blew up like a grenade and disappeared. It set that side of the oak on fire. At this point, I called the fire department because that shit wasn't going out anytime soon. Fast forward a bit, The fire department put it out relatively easily. It hadn't grown much because they had one of those big off-road bushfire trucks. Police came and questioned me. They thought I started the fire, that I committed arson. Although, mid-questioning, a dude from the FD rolls up and comes to my aid. He says there's lightning scarring on some of the trees and in the dirt, and that it couldn't be arson. Apparently, the fire followed a specific path that didn't include a lot of dry stuff because it still left marks. After a confusing hour of back and forth, they chalked it down to a destructive event of ball lightning. That remains my only experience with it, and I'm glad I haven't seen it since. Can't lie, that shit is effing scary. Well, that's it for today's stories, Rosebuds. If you did like this episode, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, maybe you'd love to prank a friend. Share this volume with them and tell them it's the scariest stories you've ever heard. We'd love to know if you enjoyed this little diversion from our normal spooky content. These stories are a little tricky to find, so if you prefer the other paranormal stuff, not to worry because we have plenty more of that to come. Now, if you don't mind us changing it up every now and then, just let us know in the comments and we'll put more of these together for you once in a while. Alright, that's a wrap. Until next time, take care and stay creepy.